What's going on, fight fans? Ryan Jarrell here for LowKick MMA, and I am pleased to be joined by Shakiel Mahjouri, who works for CBS Sports, and you're really killing it, man. You're all over the place interviewing some of the biggest fighters in the game. We appreciate the time. How you doing?
I'm doing well. We were just talking about it today. The grind never stops. We had this planned a little while in advance, so I was super stoked to do it. I wake up Monday morning, my day off. I'm like, you know what? Tuesday's looking pretty light. Gonna have a great time doing this preview, and then we'll see where the day takes us. And like within 2 hours, 6 interviews booked back to back. Very grateful for it. Not the most convenient circumstances. So, yeah, this is a perfect break between all the chaos that's happening around it. And I'm very excited to look back on the weekend we just had.
Absolutely. Well, the grind is real, man. I see everything that you're doing. So very pleased with all the success that you're having. UFC 288 is officially in the books. So let's rehash that. Let's start obviously with the main event. Aljamain Sterling retains against Henry Cejudo. Split decision. A lot of people felt like maybe Cejudo did enough to win, especially since I think it's pretty clear that he did win that fifth round. What are your overall thoughts on the fight? Do you feel like the right man won here?
I do think the right man won. I have to go back and look at exactly which rounds I give to which fighters. I'm pretty sure I gave Aljo round one, Cejudo round five, and I think I ultimately scored at 48-47 in Aljo's favor. For me, I wouldn't have been too upset had either man picked up the win. I do think Sterling was the rightful winner, but what I really would like to stress here is that one of the judges, I think it was Derek Cleary, gave round five to Aljamain Sterling. In my estimation, that is by far the most clear round for either fighter, and it should have been Henry Cejudo. So while I'm totally fine with the winner being Aljamain Sterling, the way we got there is more than a little questionable. Had Henry Cejudo gotten that fifth round, that was the swing. Had Derek given it to him, we're looking at two scorecards for Cejudo, one for Aljo, and I think he kind of got screwed with the way that the scorecards actually played out round to round.
So obviously it's very well documented. Anyone that follows the sport knows, Henry Cejudo, former champion, steps away for 3 years. Now he's back, 36 years old. Where do you feel like, or what do you feel like the future is going to look like for Cejudo? Do you feel like he's going to stick around and fight a little bit more, maybe get another shot? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I really appreciated his candor in the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan saying, you know what, man, like I'm not too sure where I go from here. If I'm not first, I'm last, right? So if I'm not the world champion, I don't want to be here. He seems to have changed his tune pretty quickly. If I'm not mistaken, I saw on social media this morning that he had called out Merab Dvalishvili. I'm not mad about. Okay, I'm a little split on the possibility of that fight. On one hand, Merab Dvalishvili and Aljamain Sterling are not going to fight each other. Aljo is fighting Sean O'Malley. It seems like the date the UFC has circled is that Boston card, UFC 292. I don't think Merab Dvalishvili should wait out the loser. He should wait out for the aftermath of that fight. It's a quick turnaround, but he's gonna be off for a little while by the time, let's say. Okay, so if Aljamain Sterling wins at 292 and vacates the title to move up to featherweight, I guess that's enough time to match Merab Dvalishvili with someone. But if Sean O'Malley wins, depending on his recovery time, we know that sometimes Sean needs some time off dealing with nagging injuries. We've seen him take long breaks. He's also not the most eager guy to rush into fights. Like he's been correctly very business savvy and methodical with his rise up the bantamweight division. So if you're looking at a scenario where Sean O'Malley beats Aljamain Sterling, I think 292 is what, August?
Yes, August 19th, I believe, is the date.
It might be a while before he's ready to take another fight. And I don't know if you want Merab Dvalishvili sidelined that long. So the idea of him versus Henry is intriguing, particularly with how the wrestling is going to match up. My problem with it, though, is you have no shortage of great high-level fighters at bantamweight. And Henry Cejudo being as competitive as he was, I guess he's in the mix now, but something just doesn't quite sit right with me with the idea of Henry Cejudo coming up in a 3 years layoff, fighting for the world championship in a division chock full of deserving contenders, and now you risk him knocking off the undoubted number one guy after Aljo versus Sean O'Malley. I just don't quite know if I want to see it happen,
Mhm.
but definitely a very interesting prospect because while both Merab and Aljo are very grappling heavy, it's very different kinds. Aljo is often looking to get to your back. His takedowns aren't the best, but it's those clinches that we see where he kind of like shucks behind the opponent. Merab just he just neutralizes you. Like there's such an overwhelming offense for the entirety of the fight that he doesn't let you get started. So I'd be very interested to see like how that sort of style meshes with an Olympic gold medalist wrestler.
What do you think about this idea? I saw Brandon Moreno make a post recently about wanting to take on Henry Cejudo for the title. Obviously, former champion. What do you think of that? Don't you think that makes maybe the most sense for Cejudo?
Sure, but he made it explicitly clear at a Joe Rogan post fight that he is not doing that cut to flyweight. So if Brandon Moreno is willing to take like sort of an Anderson Silva style fight up a division, I'm totally fine with making that fight happen because there is beef between the two. There is history you can draw from. I think Brandon is quite popular as champion as far as the lower weight classes are concerned. But you got to remember, like even Demetrius Johnson, he is the one flyweight champion, but the way their weight cutting there works, he's essentially fighting at bantamweight. These guys are getting long in the tooth. They're older in age. Those cuts were difficult on Henry Cejudo. Like we sometimes forget, I think, because of all the success Henry had during that last 6 fight run before he went on his retirement. But early Henry Cejudo in the UFC was missing weight, right? Like he was having trouble cutting the flyweight when he was young and in the prime of doing that. Maybe didn't quite have I don't even want to say he didn't have the experience because he had lots of weight cutting experience, I imagine, as a wrestler. If he was having trouble making flyweight back then, I think he's going to have an awful time doing it now. And I didn't get the sense that he was like at all eager to put his body through that.
Fair enough. Do you have any idea what he walks around at?
Couldn't tell you.
What would you guess?
Okay, well, he fought at what, 145, 135? 135. I'm really bad with this sort of stuff. I don't know,
Are you okay?
150, 160, 150?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking he's got to be all of 160.
Yeah.
So cutting to 125, that would be very, very difficult, especially at this stage of his career. So okay, that probably makes
Also, you don't put yourself through that if you don't need to, right? Like
right.
Henry has options. He has the name value. I mean, they let him jump a queue that includes like Merab Dvalishvili, Sean O'Malley, Corey Sanhagen, Piotr Jan, Cheeto Vera. Like there's no short. I know Peter and Cheeto aren't in the title mix right now, but they're very good guys. If he can get that sort of luxury at featherweight, at bantamweight, and the fact that he was eyeing a featherweight fight with Alexander Volkanovski, like I don't know what you need to give him an astronomical amount of money, I think, for him to be willing to do that cut.
Sure. Okay. And look, I mean, I don't know how you feel about the whole Aljo going to 45 eventually and wanting to compete for a title there. I think it's a bad idea. I think there's weight classes for a reason. I think Volkanovski is an absolute monster at featherweight. I don't know anybody. I feel like that. I think he's going to run through Yair. That's the story. That's a discussion for another day. But do you feel like Aljo is going to beat O'Malley next soundly? Do you feel like that's going to be his fight to go in there and really showcase his skill set?
I think Luke Thomas made a very good point on Morning Combat yesterday on Monday, which was that I think because these fights are close, and I think it speaks more to how competitive the top of the bantamweight division is that you get fights like this, that we still sort of don't collectively have this admiration for what Aljamain Sterling has done. Like, it's sort of disappointing because when you look at it, he beat Piotr Jan, TJ Dillashaw, one of the best bantamweights to ever do it, Triple C Henry Cejudo, and it still feels like every fight he's coming in like the underdog or close to it, and that the aftermath is always overshadowed by something else. I think it really speaks to the depth of bantamweight. Sean O'Malley, without a doubt, based on where his prime is right now, I say he's going to be the toughest striker that Aljo has faced since that first Piotr Jan fight. I think we're seeing Jan on a little bit of a decline right now. I saw him do the quintet grappling, which, by the way, fantastic. But if you want to get someone into grappling, show them quintet. Like I wish they would. I don't know where that's been. That stuff rules. It's if you haven't watched it, it's the team-based grappling where it's kind of a gauntlet style. First two players from each team compete. Winner stays, loser is out, and you try to go through their entire team. They have like a UFC team and like a Pride legendary team. It was really good stuff. Sean was very, very competent during that quintet event. I think he was on Team UFC, and this was while he was nursing an injury, so he hadn't been striking. He'd been only working on his grappling. His grappling is actually quite good. We just don't see it. That being said, Aljamain Sterling is a problem. Once he gets in close, he can get anybody's back. Like the fact that he took down Henry Cejudo, even if they weren't the most effective takedowns, that plays secondary. Like his goal isn't necessarily to take you down, it's to get to your back. And however he can do that, he will. I don't know how much work Sean O'Malley's going to have to do to bridge that gap. I think Aljamain Sterling should rightly be the favorite. I wouldn't be surprised if Sean can pull something off, but that should be a Sterling dub as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you there too, especially when you have someone like Matt Serra, rolling around with you, teaching you, BJJ on the ground. Have you ever met Matt Serra and shook his hand?
Man, it is one of the great sadnesses of my career that I've yet to interview Matt Serra, but let it be known that every time I interview someone from that Serra Longo camp, I am slowly building up information on Matt Serra that I will dump on his ass.
Okay, I got to tell you that. So he came up to my hometown, Bangor, Maine, for Dana White's Looking for a Fight. This is quite a few years ago now, 6-7 years ago at this point. And I'm a decent sized guy, 5'10" and a half, and I walk around at like 205 pounds or so. So I much taller than Matt Serra, and I shook his hand, and he made me feel like a little child. It's like grabbing a fistful of bananas. I couldn't believe how big his hands were.
Oh, dude, he's about as wide as he is tall.
Yeah, he's enormous. So yeah, my whole point is you got someone like that teaching you BJJ and rolling around with this, going to do nothing but obviously elevate you just to another level. So well, that was your main event. Really exciting fight, back and forth, very close, split decision victory. Aljamain Sterling makes it 9 wins in a row and retains the bantamweight title. Let's move to the co-main event. Belal Muhammad beats Gilbert Burns via UD. This did surprise me a little bit. I know Gilbert, it looked like he had an injury early in the first round. A lot of people are saying that it looks like that, maybe affected his ability to kind of be, 100% of himself. Do you agree with that? Or do you feel like, this outcome is going to be the same regardless?
I feel for Belal Muhammad the way I feel for Aljamain Sterling. It's like when stuff like this happens, I, I I think that hypercritical and sort of disingenuous critics will use stuff like this to avoid giving the due respect where it's due. Guys, it's the fight. For everyone who's saying that Gilbert Burns' performance is dictated by his shoulder injury, that's not incorrect. But that is completely, if you're going to do that, you also need to then give Belal Muhammad extra credit for coming into that fight with an ankle injury. I know there were debates about whether or not that photo from his pre-fight pictures was photoshopped or not. He told ESPN's Mark Raimondi this week that no, man, I went into that fight with an injured ankle. So if you're gonna deduct him a point for the shoulder injury suffered by Gilbert, you have to give that right back based on the ankle injury. I did pick Gilbert Burns to win that fight. I was very curious about how the circumstances of that fight coming together are going to affect things, right? Gilbert Burns fighting almost a day to his last fight, almost a month to the day of his last fight against Jorge Masvidal, had like 2 weeks off tops before having to get back into training camp. Belal Muhammad coming off Ramadan, having fasted, not at all prepared for a fight. I had no idea what it was going to impact how it was going to impact the fight. What I will say about Gilbert is sometimes I get the sense that, and he really went sort of tooth to nail with Hamza, but I think that was also a consequence of Hamza trying to prove a point. I sometimes feel that Gilbert has a hard time making mid-fight adjustments when things aren't going his way. Meanwhile, what Belal told me pre-fight is the thing he believes he has over the entire division is his IQ, that no one is as good as making in-fight adjustments as Belal Muhammad. And I think we've seen it. Like, is Belal the most exciting fighter? No. Does he have one skill set that, whether that be his knockouts or submissions or his wrestlings, that lords over the division? He'll tell you no, but it's his well-roundedness and his ability to fight to a style that sort of throws the trains off the tracks of what his opponents are doing that makes him so effective. So I wasn't surprised, and if anything, what this has shown me is that unless you have some sort of fight-changing skill, like a Francis Ngannou knockout in you, you're going to have a hard time dealing with Belal Muhammad because he is going to find a way through a combination of his preparation in advance and his adjustments he makes mid-fight to just make the whole thing ugly and difficult. So props to Belal. Did I think he was going to win 51 times out of 100? No, but the rightful man won. I don't think we should take anything away from it.
So listening to what you just said about Bilal, I don't know the way that I took it. Sounds like maybe he's got a decent shot against Leon Edwards if that title fight ever materializes. Do you feel like he could spring a small upset and beat Leon, or just analyze that for me if you would, Shaq?
Yeah, it's interesting because we didn't get to see how their first fight would play out. Leon Edwards started strong. Obviously, there's that unintentional eye poke that derailed that whole short notice main event. Uh, Kind of the story of Bilal's life too, in terms of just having to take whatever scraps of opportunities he can get. Leon Edwards is another guy with Kamaru Usman in the second fight. What I was really impressed about in the second fight was in the first one, the elevation seemed to impact Leon Edwards, had a strong first round, clearly behind rounds 2 through 4. Boom, headshot, head kick KO in the fifth round. What really impressed me about the second fight, although, it might not have had the same excitement or allure of their first encounter, is Leon had a game plan that was successful almost from start to finish against Kamaru Usman. So it's in those fights that I really take a look and think, listen, it's great that you can set up a fight-ending KO in the last minute of a fight. That's an amazing weapon to have in your tool. It's what fans are going to remember. But what I'm most curious about is, can you execute a game plan over the course of 15 or 25 minutes that's going to be effective, that's going to win you exchanges more often than not? And if you can't, can you remedy that? Belal Muhammad has shown in his last several fights that he's really unlocked or understood something about the fight game as it pertains to him and how he can employ strategies that sort of negate the offense of his opponents. Leon Edwards kind of showed me that same thing against Kamaru Usman in the second fight. So I'm very curious about how a fight between Belal and Leon will play out. I keep counting Belal out, despite him being someone who I have tremendous respect for, both professionally and personally. I think Leon Edwards should probably be the favorite in that fight, but I wouldn't have the margins very wide. At this point, I think Belal has figured out how to make the best of his opportunities and how to negate the strengths of his opponents. I think Leon should be less than a 2-1 favorite whenever those odds come out.
I'm excited to see that fight if it does happen. Obviously, as you alluded to, the first fight, we kind of got it was stolen from us because of the eye poke. We didn't get to really see, what was going to transpire in that one. So hopefully Belal does get that shot. Go right
and
ahead.
If I may, I don't know if we're going here or not, but I wrote this whole feature for CBS Sports where this is just this fight was such a patchwork to get a co-main event on UFC 287, because where were these guys in the division? Number 4 and number 5. Who had the best cases on merit for a title shot? It was these two guys. And so what we have now is Gilbert Burns is no longer a viable title challenger. Can he remedy that? Sure, but it's going to take at least 2 more fights. He's like, 36 years old now. Belal Muhammad was already on paper the most deserving title challenger. He's still the most deserving title challenger, but there's no guarantee that he's getting the shot before Colby Covington. Belal Muhammad is undefeated in 10 fights. 4 of his last 5 are against top 10 opponents. Colby Covington is 3-2 in the last 4 years. The combined records of the people he's beaten, Tyron Woodley, Jorge Masvidal, and Robbie Lawler, is 1-12 in their last 1-11, in their last 12 fights. 2 of those guys are retired. Please give Belal the title shot next.
Great point. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. And he does deserve it. He definitely deserves it. Belal should be in line for that 170 strap. Hopefully he does get that opportunity. And we'll see what's next for Gilbert Burns. He drops to 22-6 now. Like you said, he's got to win a couple probably to really even be considered to be back in that title mix. So a lot to unfold here at the welterweight division. Yan Shonan beat Jessica Andrade. Hopefully, I said that right. I always seem to butcher her name, but I didn't see this one coming, Shaq. I had Andrade winning, and Yan just went in there. That counter right, boom, it was over. And this is just a signature win for her. What's your overall takeaway of this fight, and where do you feel like this positions her for a title shot?
The biggest win by far in her career. And I agree with you. I wholeheartedly expected Jessica Andrade to win this fight. I mean, we had expectations of Yan Xiaonan for a while now that she could be a future title challenger, but recent history shows that once she sort of made her way to that upper level of the division, she struggled. And candidly, coming into this fight, TKO loss to Carla Esparza, split decision loss to Marina Rodriguez, majority decision win against Mackenzie Dern. These are not the performances that instill in me a sense of confidence that you are ever going to actually reach the pinnacle of the sport. Now, this kind of win over a former champion who's still very much an imposing threat up until the fight against Erin Blanchfield that Jessica took on short notice up a division, was looking like a dual division threat who was on the cusp of getting another chance at gold. I do want to say, terrible game plan by Jessica Andrade. I don't know what happened, but she just went in there. It you know what it reminded me of? The way she just ran in there, blitzed, hands down, chin up, kind of reminded me of Chris Cyborg versus Amanda Nunes. Like, all thought, all defense out the window. I'm just gonna blitz. Jessica competitively deserved to get hit like that. I mean, that she just was asking for it. Biggest win of Yan Xiaonan's career in this division. I mean, how do you not make that Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan fight in China? Like, you can make a case for it now. 2 back-to-back wins, knockout over a former champion. I'm trying to think who's ahead of her in the division right now. I can pull up the rankings. But I would, she should be a significant underdog against Zhang Weili, because my issue with giving Yan Xiaonan too much credit is, again, she's 2-2 in her last 4, lost to Marina Rodriguez, who's coming off of a loss, the same card to Verna Yanderova, lost to Carla Esparza, who got just destroyed by Zhang Weili, majority decision win against Mackenzie Dern, who is not at this point a top level title challenger, and then a Jessica Andrade win which was just like the worst approach to that fight. So I just don't know how that fight would have played out if we had a more measured, calm, defensively sound Jessica Andrade. I don't have a ton of faith yet that she's going to be the world champ, but at number 3 in the division, only behind Carla and Rose Namajunas, give her the fight. Like, it makes it. Listen, I know I was going off about Belal Colby Covington. I'm not sitting here like blind to the reality of what prize fighting is, right? It's just that. So my ideal isn't the most deserving guy on paper or girl on paper has to get the title shot every time. But if you're going to do what's best for business, I would love for it to at least make some sense. And this is a case where no one is getting absolutely screwed if you give Yan Xiaonan the next title fight. There's a super interesting, and I'm a sports entertainment fan as well as an MMA fan. So the idea of having 2 Chinese fighters fighting in China just sounds remarkably exciting to me. So it makes sense. It ticks all the boxes. Does it tick any one box the most? Maybe, maybe not, but it has the right combination of intrigue. Pull the trigger on this before it's too late.
Yeah, I'm with you. I totally agree there. Let's keep it moving. We'll go to the featherweight division. Movsar Evloev, UD win over Diego Lopez. And this was his debut fight here. Short notice, in the big show. Man, the kid showed a lot of heart. What's the takeaway from this one? What does it say about Lopez? What does it say about Movsar?
Was this the fight of the night? Because it as hell should have been. Yep. Oh, thank goodness. Dude, I am very excited for Lopez's future. Movsar going into this fight, still, of course, undefeated. I think he was 16-0 going into the fight against Joseph Holmes, on short notice. And you have to think about how this fight came together, right? Because it was originally supposed to be Bryce Mitchell versus Jonathan Pierce?
Jonathan Pierce, JSP.
Yes. We have one of them fall out. Movsar steps in. You have the other fall out. We get this. tremendous outing. Like, was he the better overall fighter from start to finish? No, clearly why he lost the decision, but the submission threat is so genuine. And you saw for a moment in that final round with the knee bar, like Movsar was, he was sort of cringing and he was not happy with how that knee was feeling. And we know how long injuries like that can derail people. So credit to him for sticking it out. But for Diego Lopez to come out there on a few weeks' notice, perform against a top 10 undefeated 16-0 guy and take the fight to him from start to finish. Was he better in in the majority of every round? No, but the threats he presented were genuine. The toughness, the heart were exemplary. And if I'm not mistaken, this is also Alexa Grasso's jiu-jitsu coach. So you have to think that there's not only a talent in terms of his submission acumen, but there's an understanding of how to game plan, because that rear naked choke that Alexa Grasso caught Valentina Shevchenko in is something that her and her team game planned for. It wasn't just some sort of spur of the moment. To have that sort of hindsight where there's a sort of a small window of opportunity where Alexa can catch Valentina, and for them to execute, I think says a lot about this guy and the team that he's with, mind and approach the fight game. Welcome to the UFC, Diego Lopez, and I hope this guy's on every card from now until the rest of the year.
Yeah, no doubt. I am just so glad that I wasn't near a casino to bet on Shevchenko Grasso, because I would have lost it all. I'll just leave it at that. Charles Jourdain, Kron Gracie. Jourdain gets the win. UD. Do you feel a certain way about this one?
I mean, I think everyone feels a certain way about this one. Kron Gracie's performance was just so head scratching. His attitude pre-fight and going into the fight, like, talk about looking like you don't want to be there. I'm fine with Matt Favola versus Drew Dober on the prelims only because it was sort of the ESPN headliner. That makes sense to me. That's a valuable commodity to have, particularly if you're trying to entice fans to purchase the pay-per-view. But I don't understand why Kron Gracie was on a pay-per-view main card. I guess that there's some interest based on his first two UFC fights. The Cub Swanson one was one-sided, but at least it was fun. The Alex Caceres performance was great. He has the Gracie name. To be honest, these cards that they've been offering lately, I mean, you just look at the calendar ahead, like Kai Car France as Amir against Amir Albazi and Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill are not great headliners. Even Rosenstruik versus Almeida, I'm a little contentious with. I get it. They're spreading themselves really thin. I wish they just wouldn't, but money moves mountains, so here we are. Great for Charles Jourdain to have like a comeback win. I think he needed it. Too few times in MMA do we afford, at least in UFC, do we afford people the opportunity to kind of have a little step back to kind of just like get a W under their belt, get some time to sort of improve on stuff. So in that sense, I think highly of Charles Jourdain. I think he's one of the better contenders that we have here in Canada. I'm happy with that. Kron Gracie, I don't know what that was. I don't think he should be in the UFC right now. I don't know if his heart is in it. It was just a weird fight. I guess it's fun that it was just so odd.
Well, yeah, obviously, you have that Gracie name, and that there's just so much that comes along with it. So, I feel like, that's obviously a big reason as to why he was on the main card. But I agree with you. Matt Favola, Drew Dober, that right there was main card worthy, especially kicking off a big UFC pay-per-view like this. And Matt Favola really just put a stamp on this one, and he's just so aggressive. We've seen him in previous fights when he comes forward and he's looking to get a finish. A lot of times it materializes. What does this win say about the steamroller, and also what does it say about Drew Dober?
Man, Matt Favola has unlocked something. I think prior to this, he hadn't had a single. Yeah, so all three of his decision wins, or actually, sorry, here it's a majority draw, 2 decision wins, and then a knockout loss. So all of his UFC fights prior to this most recent run of knockouts, he didn't get a single stoppage. And now we're seeing 3 consecutive first round knockouts against progressively more difficult opposition and fights where he's often the underdog. We're talking I got all my glasses on Gennaro Valdez, Ottoman Azatir, and now Drew Dober most recently. He's ready for a top 15 guy. Of that, I have no doubt. And there is a measure of sort of vengeance for Matt Frevola in all of this because his last loss is a knockout to Terrence McKinney. Drew Dober knocked out Terrence McKinney after that fight. So this puts Matt Frevola in great standing. I think it also sort of repairs some of the damages of his earlier UFC losses. What I'm still really, really curious about is what Matt Frevola looks like in round 2, because I'm just going to pull it up here. I talked to him about this. I didn't get a very clear answer, but he does not have a single win in the UFC. He does not have a single stoppage win in his career that has gone past the second round. And there was only one of those. It was the Jose Flores Dana White Contender Series fight. Beyond that, he does have decision wins, so he can win fights over the course of 15 minutes, but he hasn't shown consistently that he can knock out or submit someone after those first 5 minutes. I was really hoping, I mean, wishful thinking when you match up Matt Frevola and Drew Dober, but I was really hoping this would get into the second round because I don't know, some of these guys, they have like 5 minutes of fury and that's about it. So if Matt Frevola can maintain this sort of finishing ability through rounds 2 and 3, we're looking at a very interesting contender in the top 15. But we just don't know if that's the case yet. And that's what I would really like to find out, because it's entirely possible. Listen, it says great things about him that after a UFC run of mostly decision wins and knockout losses, that he's been able to consistently and reliably find the finish. But can he find it after 5 minutes? Because if he cannot, he's not making it too far up the top 15.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great analysis right there. And I did see a recent interview that you did with Matt Frevola. Very well done, by the way. We're running short on time, so we'll go rapid fire a little bit right now. I want to ask you about this next fight. Kennedy Njoku beats Devin Clark, standing guillotine choke in the second round. Big takeaways from this one for both men.
Yeah. I know a lot of people had sided with Devin Clark going into it. Kennedy finds an amazing stoppage win here. First submission win of his career, and kind of not quite to the same degree, but a little bit of that John Jones, Lyoto Machida. It's always nasty seeing someone go out to a standing guillotine choke and just sort of drop like that. So fantastic work on his part. And I think it was actually a ninja choke, right? Because he kind of had like a Dar setup as opposed to like a traditional guillotine. My favorite choke, super sneaky if you can get it in at the right angle. It goes from 0 to 100. There's not a lot of room to play. It's right on the neck, so you don't have sort of arms you can hang on to. There's not really much to save you once that thing gets locked in tight. Man, he's looking great. 3 consecutive wins for Kennedy. I'd like to see him take the next step, and this was an important wrinkle. We've seen him win by knockout. We've seen him win by decision. All these guys, I mean, they're MMA fighters fighting in the UFC. They have submission skills under their belt, but to be able to execute it on the big stage, I think is a very important step in terms of your well-roundedness. So he's interesting. You never know how a Kennedy fight's going to play out, because he now has wins by knockout, submission, and decision. His 3 losses, 1 by knockout, 1 by submission, 1 by decision. I love these sort of fighters because you never quite know how it's going to play out, for better or worse, but a very good hand for the UFC to have in the light heavyweight division. We know it's not always the most talent rich from top to bottom, but he's someone who puts forward exciting fights that can do it at a relatively high level. These are the kind of guys we need to sustain the heavier divisions, kind of once you move past welterweight, basically.
I want to finish with this, and I'm going to be a little selfish here. I'm going to skip over the phenomenal Chaos Williams win over Rolando Bedoya, which was somewhat controversial, split decision for Chaos. Very, very close fight. But I got to ask you about my guy, Joseph Holmes. I do a weekly podcast with him. He lost in the second round to Claudio Ribeiro. This was the last fight on his contract. He missed weight. Do you feel like the UFC resigns him, or do you feel like he's going to have to work his way back up to the big show?
Yeah, and I say this with no joy, but missing weight and losing the fight is not a recipe for success in the UFC. We've seen that they're not the most comforting presence when it comes to fighter. They're not the most encouraging or supportive. They don't give a ton of second chances when fighters miss weight, especially when they're on the losing effort, right? You win a fight, well, they got to match you up with someone else, but it's just sort of the wrong recipe for success here. 1-3 in the UFC, coming off a loss, missed weight. You know, he had a great showing on the Contender Series, but he's 27 years old, turning 28. A lot of fighters don't hit their peak until like 30 to 32. So hope is far from lost for Joseph, but this might be an important time in his career to sort of take a step down, go back to LFA, maybe try his hand out with PFL or Bellator. PFL can be a little tough. The tournament style really does no favors in terms of sort of building people up. It's kind of a sink or swim environment. The UFC, we know, is a sink or swim environment. It's something I criticize them. You know, I love UFC matchmaking because oftentimes you get the best permutations of fights you can get, but they don't do a great job of prospect development. So I say go back to an LFA or a Bellator where they're a little bit more mindful about building people up, get some more wins, give it a couple of years. I think Joseph can come back better and stronger for it.
I love it. Shaq, I appreciate the time, man. Before we do sign off, tell people where they can find your work on social media and everywhere else, and anything you want to plug. The floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the time today. Sorry I have to run. Busy, crazy day. Shaq MMA on YouTube. That's where you're going to get all the interviews this week. Anthony Smith, Johnny Walker, possibly, both the headliners as well as the Bellator headliners. Go check it out. Shaq_Fu, SHAK_FU on Twitter. Follow me there. Appreciate your time today, my guy.
Make sure to subscribe to the LowKick MMA YouTube channel for all the latest news, event previews, and interviews with some of the biggest stars in MMA.